the Thera Podcast. If you're a therapist, educator, counselor in training, or anyone interested in therapy, this is your epicenter for everything you should know. There are so many people in the world going through extreme mental and emotional issues, and we want to spotlight all the things we believe that work and the things that don't. They are wise sages, caring, intelligent, and are leaders in mental health counseling. The Thera Podcast. And here they are, Drs. Martin Wesley and David Whittinghill.
All right, welcome to another edition of the Thera Podcast. I'm here. This is Dr. Martin Wesley, and I'm here with Dr. David Whittinghill. How are you doing, David?
I'm doing very well, Marty. How are you?
Not too bad. It got chilly there for a while, and now it's back to pretty warm.
Yes, it did. And I think I'm going to have to turn my air conditioning back on.
Yeah. No, I hear you. A lot of things have passed since we were talking. One of the biggest things, I think, is the election that I wouldn't mind talking about, but also, we had even Thanksgiving. I don't know if those go hand in hand, Thanksgiving about the election. I don't know.
Nice pun, Marty. But it certainly was an election that left a lot of hard feelings and divide. I don't think the divide in our country has ever been so great as it is right now.
Yeah, no, I hear you. And again, I hope we can talk about that. And in that process, we brought a couple guests with us, and I'm looking forward to maybe all of us having this discussion. Our first is Dr. Laura Schmuldt. She's, I'll let you introduce yourself, Laura.
Thanks, Marty. Hi, I'm Laura Schmuldt. I'm the chair of the counseling department at NLU.
That did sound like a little NPR voice. That was.
I have been practicing.
I love it.
Laura Schmuldt, Curry Beach, North Carolina.
And now to you, or something like that, right? Well, our other guest is Rob Lima. He is he's been in our doc program, and he's going to be Dr. Rob Lima very soon. But anyways, introduce yourself, Rob.
Yeah, I'm just Rob. I have not been practicing my NPR voice. But yeah, I've been a counselor for a long time. The first part of my career was in school counseling. Second part was in mental health counseling. And I've gone back to get my doctorate. And I am gratefully almost finished.
All right. Sounds good. So, yeah, there was a lot of distress related to this election, I think, from especially counselors and counselor educators. I think that in general, what I have seen, at least in the places that I worked as a professor, is that most of us lean left. Do you think that's a fairly accurate statement?
Well, yeah, I think it's fairly accurate. And I think it gets back to a statement that Laura brought up in a previous discussion. You want to share that, Laura?
Yeah. I think my sentiment was, do counselors become liberal, or do liberals become counselors?
Yeah, and again, I somewhat think that maybe based on our own experience, maybe not. I know we lean left. I think there's no question about that. At least it's a profession, and that maybe not just counselors. Maybe not. It may be involved in all social work and psychology professions. If I was to make an argument, and again, I'm just shooting from the hip, but I have a feeling marriage and family therapists may be a little more conservative than the other groups. What do you guys think? I'm just throwing that out. I don't know.
I don't know, but I do believe that the more education one has, the more liberal they tend to be.
Well, that's true. Yeah. What's your thoughts, Rob?
I agree with that. It's tough. I think I've had a bit of a skewed perspective. Most of my education was in Massachusetts, up north. And so I think that Massachusetts was blue, pretty much all blue. So it was pretty liberal. I think it's a little bit more. I think it's a little bit more complicated, though. I think that there are folks. I mean, not to open up the Pandora's box, but I think religiosity becomes a big factor in all of this. But I think that we might be a little bit more balanced. I think that the liberal voices within counselor education basically do feel comfortable speaking their minds. And I think that some of the folks who might be more conservative leaning might not, because they might not feel safe. Yeah. Right. And in some classes, it might be. Anyway, I think I'll stop there.
No, it's very well said. I think that is one of my biggest concerns, actually, is that we're polarized, I think, in our education, in counselor education, and we have religious schools out there that are K-Corp accredited that are often not, I think, are suppressing some of the information. But I would argue that maybe on the liberal side of even, what we may call mainstream, we are sometimes snuffing out those voices and being, if I could say, intolerant of what they perceive as intolerance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, basically, in general, as counselors, we're non-judgmental and empathetic.
We try to be, yeah.
Well, yeah, and we try to be, right? So, I mean, if you have that leaning, then you are going to be more liberal.
Yeah.
Because you're not trying to change people and you're accepting them for who they are.
Well, I mean, I agree, David. At the same time, do you not see, and again, there's three of us that have been in this field a long time, you, Laura, and myself, and Rob, he's been in counseling for some time too, but not maybe counselor education, even though he's taught at a couple universities. But, the issue is there has been a major change since I have been a professor over the years. I would say that multicultural, the aspect of multiculturalism and being able to work with anyone, like you say, that empathy aspect that you're talking about has been there since the mid-90s, late 90s at least, in which multicultural class was being infused into the standards. And I remember having to go back and take that in the late 90s. And yet what I see is the standards have shifted tremendously over the last 25 years to a place where social justice has taken over what we even perceive as multicultural, which is, to me, the exact opposite, or I should say the opposite side of the same coin, if we would go there. Does that make sense? In other words, one, we're trying to accommodate and work with any population. The other, social justice, is trying to change cultures, aren't they?
I'm not sure, Marty.
Yeah. What do you see, Laura? I'm curious. Are we? Is social justice not trying to say that? Looking at, say, a conservative type groups and trying to change the way they perceive marriage or the way they perceive gender or anything like that. I'm not saying they're right by any means, but the issue is isn't that what social justice is about, or am I missing something?
Marty, I think there is truth to what you're saying. I don't know that every person would define it that way. But I do hear what you're saying. And I want to go back a little bit too, to to what you were talking about, before the time that multicultural counseling was even a course, I am old enough. I like to joke that I earned my master's degree in 1804, and it was not a class at that point. And I remember a professor saying, one day multicultural counseling will be a required course. And there was almost like backlash. Students were like, we don't need that. We just treat everybody the same. And so certainly this was way before social justice. But when I think back in my master's training, I don't really remember politics coming up. And I was even just thinking, even within a multicultural counseling course, wouldn't it be interesting if one assignment had something to do with political identity? You know, the way we look at understanding our other identities. And I don't know that that happens.
No, I think you're right. It's not discussed. I don't think that even the word politics or political is even in our standards whatsoever. And even multicultural has been gradually moving out, I think, and changing to, again, a social justice perspective. But no, you bring up a good point. And something that I've even seen with multicultural is often it's about the other. And it's about them. It's about the other. And that's my only fear is if we even start going there is, okay, well, this is the way conservative. In other words, and we have had a tendency that the first week of class, we talk that we don't stereotype. And then for the next rest of the class, we'd stereotype everyone. And I'm just afraid that that we will do the same here as well. All conservatives believe this, which is nonsense, of course. I don't know, Rob, you're shaking your head or agreeing with it, whatever.
Yeah, I think it's a tough place from a student perspective as well, because I know that. So, for example, the word that keeps coming into my head is authenticity or congruence. Like, I wonder. Mm-hmm. I think folks come in knowing what the expectation is. Like, and so students, instead of being real, and instead of saying I believe this, it doesn't mean that I'm evil or that I'm wrong, but I believe this. Do I have a place in here? I think they're afraid to say that, so they come in, possibly not being authentic.
Yeah.
So, like, for example, if I'm talking about sexuality or so the LGBT, my Rainbow Connection. If I'm talking about the Rainbow Connection, any of my members of the Rainbow Connection, I can see some people have a face, right? And they'll sort of a face of revulsion. I'm like, oh my God, not me. I can't even manage that. However, the words will be, oh yes, we should all be accepting and tolerant, but you're not, right? And that's okay. I'd rather work with you there than for you to say, I am, but not be, right? So I think that.
I agree.
Anyway.
And do we have those honest discussions in our classes? Because I don't think we do. I think that there's a fear of the power of the grade, and the power of perception of the way people will see you. In fact, a typical example of this is, Laura, right before you came on, you mentioned that you'd invited others to even talk about this topic. I mean, in general, and what was their response?
Yeah, they were kind of afraid enough that they said, wow, that sounds so cool, but not if it will be on the internet for everyone to hear. One had a concern that maybe a certain incoming political figure is monitoring conversations enough. I think this individual said something about payback for media people. I don't know that folks chatting on a podcast would meet that criteria, but still, that was a concern. And then concerns around, how do I know where I might look for a job one day, and what kind of Google search will happen, and what will they learn about me, and will that be at odds with institutional norms and things like that.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. That's really unfortunate, because you would think that an institution that's based on helping people would be welcoming to anyone who gone through a counseling program and has the necessary knowledge and skills to be able to provide it without any judgment on who they are from a 1 hour long podcast.
Yeah. I agree. It's unfortunate. I mean, but at the same time, I think it's real. I mean, and why I think it's real is that I've been there. Not only in a previous institution in which it was more conservative, that I knew that my job was potentially at risk for having a family member from the LGBT community, but your whole livelihood is attached to that. But also, I would say that because I have had one foot in the conservative movement in the past, and being able to see across the fence at those conservative friends and family, now. I also, being in a more liberal institution, I put on that face that Rob was talking about at times, and I fight so against that, but I understand it. And I'll give you an example. And we could talk more about these specific examples later if you want, but and that would be meritocracy or color blindness. If I was speaking about in a multicultural class, which is a class I've specifically avoided because I have been told by many that I don't have a culture because I'm a white male. And that's a struggle for me. But because I would want to speak from both sides of this issue of I would have no issue talking about critical race theory, for example, but I would also want to talk about the aspect of color blindness and let the students themselves come up with the best solution or a mix of both that they come out. I think that's what education is about. It's not indoctrination. It's about giving them all sides of the issue. And unfortunately, I do not see that in most counselor education.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And so, so I'm talking from me. I have felt that I want to be the authentic self that Rob described, but I feel like sometimes I can't because I need to put food on the table. Laura, you were going to say something. I'm sorry if I interrupted.
Well, a lot was said, and it's exciting, to talk about these things in a safe and honest manner. But I keep thinking about all of our multiple identities, our intersectionality, and teasing those apart and almost understanding the history of each. Marty and I, we have a shared background, I believe. I grew up in a very strict evangelical Christian sort of household and community. And, I know for me, I think everybody I knew was a Republican, but I had a sister with severe developmental disabilities. And I very much remember during the Reagan presidency, there were changes, there were cuts to services that my sister could have been allowed. And I think, I was a kid, but I think that started my thinking that might have led me down sort of a more liberal path. And I hope I'm not going off the rails here too much, but wouldn't it be a fascinating topic to have our students understand their political identity, how they arrived there, and having those conversations in small groups with other students as sort of a way of expanding that empathy, expanding that worldview, and maybe a small step towards decreasing this polarization that we feel everywhere.
Yeah, I like that because it aligns with the brave angel work that's going on.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm not familiar with that.
Marty can talk more about it than I can.
Yeah, it's a movement that actually was started by what's his name? I can't think. Anyway, American family therapist, Bill Doherty, American family therapist. You know what I'm talking about. And he, for the most part, just seeing the polarization in our society and bringing communities together in which they discuss their differences and try to talk about the stereotypes and what's the left say about the right and what the right says about the left, and they discuss it and get to know each other on a personal level, and all of a sudden that they have more respect for the other side. Anyways, just using counseling techniques, which we should be, I think, teaching our students to do, but instead we, as professors, often engage in hyperbole and rhetoric.
Excellent point, Marty.
Two politically incorrect counseling professors and therapists with never-ending experience and wisdom who are proud to be politically incorrect. You're listening to the Thera Podcast. Now, back to your hosts, Drs. Martin Wesley and David Whittinghill.
You know, and Laura, I'm curious what you think about this. I heard this on a video a little while ago, and it really hit me. And I shared it with David earlier too, but it was a woman that just was making a statement along the line of, since she had been in that conservative background before and was now in a different place, that it was her responsibility. And I would say for us, it's our responsibility to actually bridge that, because we can see both sides. Whereas others that have not, been able to travel on both sides of that fence really can't truly talk about the landscape on the other side, and often resort to characterizations that are just not true. So I'm putting a lot of responsibility on our part, but I think it is our responsibility in some ways, isn't it?
Yeah. And how do we do that? Where do we start? What does that look like? Because I think what did they find in this past election? Like, some astronomical percentage of Americans get most of their news from TikTok, and Facebook Reels and, Instagram videos. And I'm certain those algorithms deliver us messages that are congruent with what we want to believe anyway, right? So it's just this echo chamber of reinforcing our own beliefs. And, yes. It's very easy to see how that makes the other side even worse. They're badder. They're, even more polarization. I just, Marty, I was just thinking about how this might shake out in a class. One thing, on the first day, I have each student introduce themselves and say what kind of work they're in, if they're working. And, there might be somebody who's military, somebody who's police, somebody who's a minister. And I wonder if right from then, are assumptions being made? Are students, painting the other ones into a box about what they anticipate their point of view is on a huge range of issues?
No, I'm sure you're absolutely correct. And the issue is how do we? Again, we have to have these discussions, and we're not having them. That's the problem. So, do I make judgments about someone that's applied? For example, you've seen it in my interview and questions, I'm sure, when someone comes in to take a faculty or to interview for a faculty position, and I see that they've come from, let's say, a very conservative theological background, maybe even a seminary. Yes, I do, but it's not that I the issue is my questions are trying to flesh it out rather than just making the assumptions and going on. And that's what we're not doing. We're not saying, hey, I got to ask you this question, but do you accept, our students who are LGBT? I mean, why not just ask it rather than making the assumption and just saying, hey, they're bad. And while I'm going to allow them to be interviewed, I'm not going to seriously consider them because I know where they came from. So.
Yeah, Marty, that's such a great point. And I think it's this mix of, like, in polite company, we don't ask.
Right.
And look where that's put us, right? Look where that's put us.
Yeah, it's called discrimination.
Yeah.
What's your thoughts, Rob? I know you're going to probably be looking for a faculty position one day, and I'm sure that this has got to be considerations of what you're thinking about. So.
In an earlier phase of my life, maybe I think, well, about me. I am a gay male, and so in a time when it wasn't cool, and so growing up, you spend a lot of time in the closet. You spend time. I think there was a time from sixth grade throughout all of high school where I was beaten every single day, physically or emotionally. Like there was put downs every single day, 185 days times 6 plus 90. You know what I mean? So there was a lot of that. So there was very definite times when it wasn't. So you spend so much time isolated that when you come out the other end, and thank God I came out the other end, I don't care. Do you know what I mean? Like, if you don't want me, I don't want you. I'm not going to search for those positions where I can't be authentically me.
Right.
And I think from a counseling perspective, and I understand the fear if you haven't gone through something like that, but it is scary. But you come out the other end, you have the potential to come out the other end stronger. And what I can say, having been through some of that too, is that, it goes back to Rogers. Rogers is my counseling hero. I'm only free to change when I accept myself as I am. If I can't accept me as I am, as a student, as a professor, a supervisor, a clinician, whatever, I'm not going to change. And so for me, what this has taught me, as I've been teaching since 2016 in various places, so I have to own it. So if I care about opening up the space and making it safe, then I have to say, here are my identities. I'm white. I'm cisgender. I'm male. I grew up low SES. I grew, blah, 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 blah. And when I'm talking about something in class, I'm going to say, from my perspective as a gay male, from my perspective as a white male, from my perspective as here's my class, male. here's my perspective. What's yours? And identify, from where are you speaking? But if we don't make the space, they're not going to take it. Right. And so we're going to be, I don't know, ignoring the giant elephant in the room. And I'm not interested in doing that. I don't think it serves us to do that.
Wow, Rob, thank you, for sharing that. My therapist heart breaks that you went through all of that. And I'm not turning this into a counseling session, I promise. But I know from students describe you as the professor that has made the biggest impact, the professor that has touched their life, that has changed who they are. And I just want to say that I marvel at, that your mindset and how you have not come out as a bitter and angry person when you had reason to be,
Yeah. That's incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well said.
This whole time I've been listening to you guys, it occurred to me that the statement you made earlier, Laura, which was before multicultural, there was a pushback from the students who said, we treat everybody the same. And that just harkens back to when I was younger, a younger counselor, and Rogers stuck with me. And if we used Rogerian and stuck by that as our guiding light, our guiding North Star, we would treat everybody the same. I don't think that I think what Roger was trying to get through to all of us was that we are all humans, regardless of intersectionality and race and different cultures and all that sort of stuff. Do we have to get to know each other? Do we have to build that bridge with our clients? Absolutely, we do. And we do that every time we open up a counseling session. But I think we kind of lost our way and went too far the other way sometimes. And I like we ended up with stereotypes. And I don't know, I haven't worked with anybody in all my years of counseling in which our multicultural books that came out with these stereotypes, nobody fits those stereotypes.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm. And that's been a big problem. Mm-hmm. And it's if it did anything for my students and it did anything for me, it was just made things more confusing. You know? I'm always going to refer, in my mind, my North Star will always be Rogers and his work on humanism. And if I get a ding for that and somebody listens to the podcast, well,
I think you're in good company. I would agree with you. You know, clients are looking, you know, when they look for, I think, a therapist, they're going to go online, they're going to look at our pictures, and they're going to say, I think that person aligns the best with me. But what they're really looking for is someone that accepts them for who they are. Again, that commonality. It's the commonality. It's the humanness that allows for that therapeutic alliance to occur. We will never completely align with age or gender or, race in every aspect, or military, or whether, all of these different culture potential aspects that we're trying to align. There will always be areas that will not perfectly align. But if we focus on our humanness, that we're sad when things happen, mm-hmm. and when we, again, just what Rob was sharing. I'm a heterosexual male that is married, and in fact, Don and I will be engaged for 40 years ago next week, which is something I was just thinking about. But the issue is Rob didn't make me feel like I had to apologize, and I have been in too many classes, too many mandated cultural understanding classes that I had individuals within that class that apologized because they were male or because they were white or whatever. And that is when I think we're going way too far. And again, nothing wrong with talking about critical race theory or anything related. I think we need to. It's our obligation to talk from all aspects. But we should still arrive at the place that I think you're talking about, which is our humanness. That we all cry and are depressed and are angry and are pissed, and we want, all of those things. That's what brings us together.
So what I hear you saying is Carl Rogers for president 2020 or whatever's next. No, but what else? I mean, what a refreshing message. Like, we need Carl Rogers for the masses in yes. some ways, Marty.
Dawn had a T-shirt that she wore all the time that said Frodo and Sam for president or something like that. Yeah. No, I hear you.
I do find myself thinking, though, with Rogers, I think it's a little bit more complicated with him. I think that if we look at it on one level, sure, non-judgmental acceptance or unconditional positive regard, as he termed it, that's phenomenal. But I think that can't happen if we haven't examined ourselves. Like, intentionality and self-awareness precedes mm-hmm. that, and so I don't think that we can we are not non-judgmentally accepting someone if we haven't dealt with our own demons first. If I'm not aware that I don't know, whatever that I'm sexist or whatever the thing is, then I can't I can't accept you. Then I'm going to be one of my first supervisors. This is in a way other decades ago. One of my first supervisors, I was thinking about coming out to her. She made there was a student, a second grade student, I think at the time, who had two moms, and she made this face like, ugh, when I saw her, and that was sort of like, oh, uh-oh. You know what I mean? So, and certainly this was someone doctoral level, leader in the field kind of thing. Definitely not appeared non-judgmental to an untrained eye, but was, so if we don't make it a safe place for people to be who they are and to express that openly and honestly, and us accept that and try to work within it, we can't do what Rogers. we simply can't. We can pretend that we are, but we're not doing it. And that's more tragic, I think, than anything.
I totally agree with you, Rob. And self-awareness is key, right? So if I'm not aware of who I am, my biases, so on and so forth, or my own, I'm going to use the word culture. Marty said we didn't have one as white men, but if I'm not aware of my own culture and how it impacts others, then I'm not fit to be a counselor. I'm just sorry, it doesn't work that way. So I do believe we have to be aware of ourselves and our intentions as we go about as we do our work as a counselor. That's just something that has to happen. Without that, I don't know how it would happen. I don't know how it would work. For example, with my clients, I think you bring up a really good point here, which is that if I don't get to know my clients, if I don't know their background, I don't know who they are, then I can't work with them. So, and if I can't accept who they are, then I have a real problem. So I don't want to beat a dead horse here, but it's very critical. And right now, after the election, sorry to switch horses in the middle of the stream, so to speak, but
you're talking a lot about horses. I'm just curious.
Well, I grew up in Kentucky. What can I say?
Okay, that's true. Yeah, you do have a culture then. Okay.
Yeah, I do have a culture. I have clients now, and half of them were upset with the election, just demonstrably upset, agitated and angry. And the others were very happy about the outcome. And for me to remain as neutral as possible, right? And just, that was very difficult for me, just to maintain that stance where I didn't offend either group.
Yeah.
Right? So I had to be...
And be authentic.
Yes.
Yeah. Because that's the challenge to me.
Possible.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I was very cognizant that if anything there are things that I could say that would be hurtful or offensive to each one of the groups, each one of the individuals that I'm working with. So it wasn't as easy as I thought it might be, but it took more work on my part.
Yeah.
I'm sure, David. I'm sure. And, I'm thinking about professors I know that after the election, maybe they can't, I know for a fact, canceled class because they were so disheartened, or use class to process sadness. And I'm just thinking about how different we might interface with students. I'm not saying good, bad, right, or wrong, versus clients. Yeah, there's something I want to loop back to, but I don't want to also lose your point, David. And Rob, when you were talking about that supervisor, you said who seemed to have like, I know somebody similar, doctorate leader in the field, and the words out of her mouth regarding the LGBTQ plus population was, "Love the sinner and hate the sin."
What?
Yeah. And I'm thinking, like, I go back to, like, Marshall Linehan and DBT saying a fundamental error we make in working with clients with borderline personality disorder. I see you as inherently different than me. And how do you understand somebody and work with them when you have that point of view? And so I kind of like, I'm seeing this parallel here. And I think it, David points back to what you were saying, and Rob, you were saying about when we don't do our own work, where are we? But we all think we've done our own work, don't we?
It's never over.
No, yeah, that's a good point. And the other aspect that I thought was interesting about what Rob said about the idea of about looking inward is that from what I was hearing from you, Rob, is you didn't try to make claims about certain groups for example, all heterosexual people need to this or need to examine themselves or, again, and that's what going back to what I think has been dividing our country in many ways is related to this promotion of guilt or victimhood by again, not examining ourselves, but by examining large groups of people and often, conservatives in that way. And they're sick of it. They're sick of it.
Yeah. Yeah. They feel unheard. And I understand. And I do not. So, if you've talked with me for 2 minutes, you know where I stand politically and ideologically, but I feel comfortable in myself. And I think about this with regards to empathy and our lack of understanding of what empathy is, that there's even a cohesive model, and there isn't. That I think we, and it goes back to Martin Buber too. I think about the I-thou relationship that he wrote about, but really that I don't have to, when I'm empathizing with you, I don't have to adopt. I'm not becoming you forever. I'm entering your world as if I'm you. I'm seeing the world from your perspective. I emerge from it. I calm myself down, and then I talk to you. Like, that's what it is. So, these value things that people struggle with, I think, maybe it's just a clinical experience. I've worked with plenty of people who, a lot of people would consider reprehensible. Like, I've worked with kids who've set fires to kill people, and kids that have fed rocks to dogs, like things that I can't quite wrap my head around, and that Rob, the person, would be like, oh no, go. But me, the person, I have to find a way to work with you. And the way I'm going to work with you is to enter your world. I have to see, how did you become, how did you get here, right? I have to find that. I have to find compassion and love for you within myself so that I can help you. I respect your humanity, and we'll find a way to work together. But I can't do that without acknowledging I feel this way about you, finding a way to work through it. But we have to do that. If we don't do that, we're missing it. Right? We're missing the point. And when we're teaching students, we have to make that friendly. And I think they need training to do that. If I'm asking you to think about something challenging, maybe I'm asking you to speak about it from the perspective of a Latin male. How would a white low SES female respond to this statement? Something along those lines. But they have to have practice. You know what I mean? And or maybe somebody who's super left. Maybe I'm going to ask you to adopt the perspective of a conservative white male.
Exactly.
Baptist Bible Belt. Try it out. It's not you. You're playing a role for now. Try it.
Well, the simple example is what happened just a little earlier. You just opened up and shared with us a very vulnerable time in your life just for 10 seconds. And I saw, again, this is not just audio, that people are listening to. Yeah, it's all audio, but we're in a Zoom room right now. But I saw Laura, I saw David, and I felt going into your world and visions of my own being picked on because I was different. And in that case, it was actually because I was a conservative Christian kid with, on fire for Jesus patches on me. Seriously. And I was being picked on for those kind of things. But I was able to, even from a totally different background, place myself into your world for just that short second. Again, we didn't have to agree on everything, but we had those shared human experiences like David was talking about that bonds us in that way. That's what being a counselor, I thought, was about. To me, it's, at times I struggle with neutrality because I don't think we can be. Exactly. I think it's impossible. And to me, we do a disservice to our clients when we do. We have to be our authentic self. Not that we have to, we're not there to tell them, well, but Trump's, this or that. We don't have to go into that, but we can certainly enter their world or and be able to understand what that's like. And we're not there to change their mind on certain things. That's not our job. That's not what we should be about. We shouldn't all of a sudden become a political advocate inside our counseling office. I don't know.
But we need training in that, and it's not going to happen by accident. There's an intentionality that comes well, in my opinion, there's an intentionality that comes with that. I'm intentionally entering your worlds, and so I'm going to intentionally do it in this way. But they need help with that. And the only way that I know to do that is, by being real, by being real. And the danger in that, if you're not self-aware and you haven't done your work, is that you're going to cross the I thou boundary. You're going to cross that, become that, and then you're going to become defensive and start proselytizing and all of that. Right. And I don't think, for me, there's no place in that. I can accept. I can have my beliefs and my values and whatever. You can have yours, and we can find a way to work together very well if we're both willing to engage and intentional about that engagement.
I love it. Love it.
Do you think there is a perception that folks who haven't been to counseling imagine it will be that way, that there will be like a proselytizing dynamic to it?
What do you give me an example of what you're thinking, Laura? I'm curious.
Because if therapists are viewed as being more liberal, right? Yeah. Is there a segment of the population that thinks if they see a therapist, there will be some attempts at indoctrination?
I have just started on a book, and I want to talk about this on later podcasts, but it's called Bad Therapy. Has anyone heard of this? Now, to me, the person has really got a beef with counseling, obviously, and I think has done it inappropriately in many ways. However, I can't argue that there has been some major abuse in our profession, and we are oblivious to some of the negative things that we do. And their primary focus in that was related to children and our lack of understanding and how we may be indoctrinating children. And do I see that as what I'm hearing related to the Republican right side of this issue? Are they fearful of what's happening related to education and related to therapy, the therapeutic culture in general? Yes, I completely agree with you, Laura. There's a fear of that, and that seeking help for something also almost is saying that it's true. Mm-hmm. Acknowledging that something is true, and sometimes, and you know what? I would make an argument that sometimes that maybe counselors should not be sought out for everything in the world, and that sometimes, trauma is over exaggerated, and that sometimes it's just shit happens at school, and we take that to a place where we make victims of people. So yeah, I think there's some valid points to some of that. At the same time, again, we're seeking balance. Rob, I know you work with, children, or have worked with children for many, many years too. And I'm just sort of curious what you think about that too. Are people afraid that we're going to ruin, counselors are going to ruin their kids?
100%. 100%. And I think that,
make them gay, make them trans, make them, whatever, disobedient to their parents. I don't know.
Well, the funny thing is, I think a lot of that's culturally, it's multifactorial. I mean, but I think I've worked in a community behavioral health setting in my mental health practice, and then pretty much all of it. And then in my school counseling practice, it was a charter school in Western Mass, and it took urban, rural. It pretty much spanned the length of the state, so rural to really urban. And so it was, so I've had a lot of experience with a very diverse experience with very diverse individuals. And I can tell you that from a certain perspective, I think that from the adult perspective, because I've worked with adults too, they tend to look for, I've noticed anecdotally that they tend to look for people who agree with them first. Mm-hmm. And so if they're really super Baptist or super Christian or whatever, they're going to look for that. And they're going to look for the Christian counselors, and they'll find the person who eventually works for them. They tend to go through a lot before they come to me, and then they come to me, and I've worked with super, super right folks, and super liberal. So they eventually find the right person. From a child perspective, I can tell you that kids generally don't care, but their parents do. And as a male play therapist, I'm a bit of a unicorn. I've been told by the most recent place that I've worked that we don't want to place, you're never going to work with girls because girls will never want to work with you. And I'm a trauma specialist, and I do child-centered play therapy with, if they don't want to work with me, they're out of luck. You know what I mean? They end up with me, and they do great. And on the other, so the parents often, so instead of trying to impress the child, which I don't do, I spend a lot of time getting to know the parents, and I let them know this is your choice. You can choose me, and if you don't choose me, it's okay. But get to know me. Let me do the intake with you. I'll get the assessment. I want you to feel comfortable. I want to show you what I plan to do play therapy wise with them. It's it is child-centered exclusively for kids 8 and under. And I show them the playroom, and I show them what we do. And once they know that I'm okay, then they're okay. And the child is always okay. The children generally, once they meet me, they think, yeah, okay, this can work. But parents, yes.
Well, and from what I'm hearing from you too, is that you understand their culture, and you're actually educating them, and because of that understanding, actually winning them over in a sense.
Yes. But the indoctrination, yes, particularly with adolescents. I have had people, if they know that I'm gay, particularly the fathers will say, "Oh, I don't want you working with my son because you'll whatever." All these stupid stereotypes that would never happen, never happen. But so anyway, so I've experienced it from both perspectives, but I think indoctrination is a concern for some people.
Yeah. Golly, I do feel like we have just touched the surface of all these areas that I think has contributed, to the polarization in our society, and has infiltrated, I think, somewhat in the counselor education field. I'd like to talk more about this in the future, but again, we just touched the surface. Laura, do you think we got plenty of content?
Absolutely. This has really been a pleasure. And I didn't walk into this expecting that my Rogerian heart would be revived in some ways. And honestly, just the simple, if we would just maybe stop having a lot of assumptions about others and have conversations.
Yeah.
Geez. I mean, yeah.
I agree.
Kind of gives you a sense of hope. Or at least I'm walking away with this with a sense of hope, and also ideas of what I might do differently with students.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. It's so important that we just discuss it. I have, and again, my classes, and of course, we work closely together on a lot of them, but again, and I know you did the same, but there's nothing they could ask or talk about in a class that I would be fearful of. Nothing. I'm more than willing to talk about anything. And I just feel like there are these barriers that professors feel like I can't go there. And again, because they're scared that they're being recorded or they're going to offend. And again, that lack of being real in many ways is also there. I don't know. I teach human sexuality. I teach, I've taught every class out there. And golly, if the students can ask it, then I should be able to try to answer it, or at least we discuss it. Not that we're going to have conclusions on anything, but I want to be able to explore it. If somebody says, hey, look at this thing, then, pass it over to me. Let me look at it. Then I'm going to pass it back to another student. And we're all going to examine that and talk about that, rather than I, as the professor, am going to tell you what that is.
Mm-hmm.
Because I have a doctorate.
Yeah, absolutely, Marty. And I think, based on this conversation, it sounds like most of us, all of us, have been the odd one out. We've been the one who's been marginalized. We've been the recipient of bullying or hate or whatever it was. And while I may not agree with the students' politics, I don't want to cause anyone to feel that way in a classroom.
Yeah, I hear you. And I know it happens. But yeah, we need to have that intentionality of trying to almost play devil's advocate of the other side, the minority position sometimes, just to bring it out, if nothing else.
Mm-hmm.
Well, David, I think this has been another good podcast. I hope all of you guys will be joining us for another time in the future.
Absolutely. Carl Rogers for president.
All right. Well, thanks, everyone. And we will do this again.
You've been listening to the Thera Podcast. If you're a therapist, educator, a counselor in training, or anyone interested in therapy, this is your epicenter for everything you should know. Dr. Martin Wesley and Dr. David Whittinghill are counseling professors and therapists who have endless knowledge and wisdom. We hope you've enjoyed the show, and we hope you've gotten something from it. We'll be back soon. But in the meantime, you can find our website at www.therapodcast.com. Find the show on all the major podcast platforms. And if you'd like to email Wesley, send it to wesleyphd@gmail.com. Take care and see you next time on the Thera Podcast.